Who could it be at this late hour? My husband and I checked the video intercom when the doorbell rang. There was our 5-year-old granddaughter Nancy standing there, shivering.
Grandma, help me.
I quickly opened the door and let Nancy in. Come in, you must be cold. Where are your mom and dad? Nancy's body felt warm. Clearly, she had a fever. Surely. You didn't come here alone? Her response filled us with shock and anger. My name is Pamela, a 62-year-old housewife. Occasionally, I help my husband with his work. My husband, Ron, is the owner of a real estate company. It's locally based and not very large in scale, but thankfully, its performance is good, and we live comfortably. However, there is one concern on our minds. My daughter Molly and my granddaughter Nancy, who will turn 5 this year, are the one we have. Molly has always had a strong-willed personality since she was young, but as she entered her rebellious teenage years, her defiance only grew stronger. Her circle of friends also became gradually more flashy and mischievous. Despite our efforts to communicate with her, Molly's rebellious attitude has been resistant to change. My husband and I have patiently watched over her, believing that one day we would understand each other better, but that day has yet to come. After graduating from high school, my daughter moved out to live on her own while attending vocational school, and she rarely visited us. Several years passed, and she got married and gave birth to a daughter. Once she became a mother, she started to visit us with her child more frequently, and we thought that perhaps the day of understanding had finally arrived. However, over the past 6 months, our relationship with our daughter has begun to drift apart again. She doesn't reply to emails, and calls go to voicemail, leaving us unable to see our daughter and granddaughter. We assumed she must be busy. One day, I heard a concerning story from a close friend of mine. They mentioned seeing Nancy playing alone on the swings in the park, even though it was already dark outside in the late afternoon. Considering that it's not typical for a small child to play alone at that time and that there were no apparent adults around, it raised serious concerns. After hearing this, I couldn't shake off my worries, so I immediately called my daughter, but it went to voicemail as usual. Unable to sit still with worry, I decided to visit my daughter's home impulsively. My daughter, her husband Andy, and my granddaughter live in an apartment about a 15-minute drive from my home. She had been a stay-at-home mom ever since she became pregnant with my granddaughter, so I figured she'd be home on a weekday morning. However, there was no response when I pressed the intercom. When I rang it again, I got a response in an irritated tone, "Yes." As soon as she realized it was me, my daughter responded with a flustered tone.
Huh. Mom? If you were coming, you should have called first.
I called several times. You didn't reply to messages, and I couldn't reach you, so I came over. Can we talk for a bit?
The house is really messy right now, so I'd rather you didn't come in. Besides, Nancy isn't feeling well and she's resting.
It seemed my daughter really didn't want me to come up. Let's talk in the small park in front of the apartment building. Just for about 10 minutes. Reluctantly, my daughter agreed, and we ended up sitting on a bench in the small park in front of the apartment building to talk.
Just showing up without any notice. What's the deal? It's incredibly rude.
My daughter started speaking with an irritated tone. I've tried to contact you multiple times. I called you many times. How have you been lately? I haven't seen you in a while, so I was worried. Also, There's something bothering me that I want to ask you about. I told her the story I heard from a friend about seeing a child look like my granddaughter alone at the park.
That person must have been mistaken. I wouldn't let her wander around alone at such a late hour. Don't worry, we all are doing fine.
Is that so? Well, if you say so. In the end, I couldn't get much information that day and had to return home without seeing my granddaughter. A week later, I heard something concerning from my husband. Apparently, during a real estate industry gathering he attended, he bumped into a friend of 20 years who has been running a construction company. During their conversation about their respective companies, it came up that there's an employee at the friend's company whose work attitude seems to be lacking.
Apparently, this employee is always talking about slot machines instead of focusing on work. If it were just casual hobby talk, I might overlook it, but it seems he's also borrowing money from colleagues. And you know what? The more I heard about it, the more it sounded like it might be Andy. The name and description match up too well to be him.
Andy is my daughter's husband. He and my daughter were high school classmates, and they've been dating since then, belonging to a rambunctious group of friends. After graduating high school, Andy worked various jobs before joining his current company.
I couldn't bring myself to say, that guy might be our son-in-law.
Yeah, you're right. Hey, I think I'll visit Molly again. I've been worried about Nancy's condition since the other day, and it's been a while since I've seen her. My husband seemed equally concerned about how our daughter's family was doing and if our granddaughter was well. We decided to visit our daughter's house again the following Saturday to check on things. And on Friday night. Since we were planning to head to our daughter's house early the next morning, my husband and I went to bed a little earlier. After falling asleep for a while, we were awakened by the sound of the doorbell. Who could it be at this hour? My husband and I checked the video intercom, feeling cautious. Nancy. To our surprise, there was our granddaughter Nancy standing there shivering.
Grandma, please help me.
I quickly opened the door and welcomed Nancy inside. Come in, it must be cold outside. Where are your mom and dad? Nancy's body felt unusually hot in my arms. When I touched her forehead, it was clear she had a fever. What are you doing here at this hour? Did you come alone? I carried Nancy back to the living room. She was breathing heavily, perhaps due to the high fever. Most shocking of all was that she appeared much thinner than when we last saw her 6 months ago. I quickly fetched a blanket. In the living room, my husband was giving Nancy some hot milk. After laying her down on the sofa and wrapping her in a thick blanket, Nancy seemed to calm down a bit. I asked Nancy, "What are you doing out here at this hour? How did you come here all alone?"
Mommy and Daddy went shopping. Mommy told Nancy to stay in bed because I caught a cold.
After that, my granddaughter slowly opened up and shared her story. Despite the darkness outside, her parents didn't return, leaving her feeling lonely and hungry without any food. Feeling overwhelmingly vulnerable, she decided to walk to her grandparents' house, despite the late hour. She walked alone for what would have taken adults at least an hour, all while feeling unwell from her cold and overwhelmed by her emotions. Hearing her story, my heart felt heavy. We decided to take Nancy to the emergency hospital that night. The doctor diagnosed her with a high fever due to a cold and slight malnutrition, and she needed to receive intravenous fluids. As I watched my granddaughter sleep while receiving the tears welled up in my eyes. At the same time, I couldn't contain my anger towards my daughter and her husband for treating her like this. My husband seemed to share the same feeling. I stayed by my granddaughter's side the whole time, but after a while, my husband returned with our daughter and her husband.
They were drinking with their gambling buddies at a nearby pub.
After dropping off my granddaughter and me at the hospital, he went around the nearby pubs to look for them. Finally, on the fifth try at a pub, he found our daughter and son-in-law drinking with their friends. Apparently, even their friends were shocked to learn that they had left their young daughter alone. In a move to assist my husband, they forcibly brought our daughter and son-in-law to the hospital. They must have been scolded quite severely by my husband in the car. Both of them looked quite awkward. Do you two realize what you've done? Be honest and tell us everything you've done so far. Unable to bear it, I questioned them sternly, and they began to confess everything they had done. Every weekend, they would go to the slots and leave Nancy alone until late at night. And when they were lucky enough to win, they would gather their friends and go out drinking until the early hours, just like today. Surprisingly, they basically neglected Nancy, sometimes even serving her ready-made meals or, at worst, not providing her with any food at all. I couldn't hold my anger any longer. I will report you to the police. You're aware that what you're doing is wrong, right? That's why you stopped visiting us and refused to let me visit you. If things continue like this, you'll just keep repeating the same mistakes.
What are you talking about? Involving the police is too extreme. Don't you love your own daughter?
We also have a responsibility for raising you like this. Because you're our daughter, we will make sure you reflect on your actions properly. We'll take care of that. You've done something unforgivable. Do you understand? Afterward, since there was no resolution with the daughter and her husband, my husband decided to report them to the police. Sometime later, they were sentenced to imprisonment. Our granddaughter Nancy came to live with us as we took her in. When she recovered, she asked us where her parents had gone. We couldn't hide it from her, so we decided to tell her the truth. You see, Mommy and Daddy did something very wrong to Nancy. They have to say sorry in another place for a while. So, until Mommy and Daddy come back, let's live together at Grandma and Grandpa's house, okay? Nancy listened quietly with her head down. Perhaps she understood in her own way, as she began to cry quietly, and I hugged her. It's okay, we'll be fine. Let's live happily together with Grandma and Grandpa from now on. I promise, Nancy, we won't let you feel sad. After that, my husband and I were busy every day with our second round of parenting. I prepared nutritious meals every day, considering her preferences, while my husband took her out to play whenever he had time off. Nancy's complexion improved day by day, and she started to look plumper like a girl her age. Most importantly, it was wonderful to see her smiling more often. Several years passed, and my daughter was released from prison. A few days after her release, she came to visit us. When I opened the front door, she bowed deeply to us.
I'm truly sorry for everything. I've reflected on the unforgivable things I've done. I'm deeply sorry once again.
She seemed genuinely remorseful as she apologized to us. After inviting her in and listening to her story, she told us that she had divorced Andy, her husband. Her time in prison had changed her drastically, and she appeared much calmer and more subdued than before.
Is Nancy here? I want to live with her again, so I've come to pick her up.
Calling out her granddaughter's name, my daughter looked around the living room.
Mom?
Before I knew it, my granddaughter had come out of her room.
Nancy. You've grown so much. And you're so tall now.
Whether it was from happiness to see her mother or from nervousness, Nancy's face seemed a bit shy.
Yeah.
Mommy's here to take you home.
However, when my daughter reached out her hand, Nancy instinctively stepped back.
No. I want to stay with Grandma and Grandpa.
Mommy will make lots of your favorite food, Nancy.
When I was little and hungry, Mommy didn't cook for me. Grandma cooks a lot for me. And on days off, Grandpa plays with me a lot. I don't want to feel hungry and lonely like before.
As she spoke, Nancy shed tears.
Nancy, let's go back to your room.
My husband took crying Nancy back to her room.
Wait, I won't make you feel that way anymore.
In the end, my daughter couldn't go home with Nancy that day. It was inevitable, but seeing my daughter leaving in tears was very painful. Afterwards, my daughter rented a small apartment and started living on her own. She works in a warehouse, which is physically demanding and quite challenging. It's still early days, but my husband and I have decided not to give up on her and watch over her. She always hands over child support every month without fail. Seeing her like this, it seems she has truly turned over a new leaf. And whenever she meets me, she always asks about Nancy. I told my daughter this. Even though Nancy was young, she hasn't forgotten what happened to her. When Nancy grows up more, maybe the day will come when she can forgive you. Until then, all you can do is keep your distance and watch over her. My daughter nodded tearfully at my words. Nancy is growing up healthy and thriving. It seems she has made many friends at school and she tells us about her day at the dinner table every day. Hearing such stories brings me immense happiness. Though I feel bad for my daughter, I can't help but wish for days like these to continue. But I hope that someday Nancy will be able to forgive her mother, and when that day comes, I wish for my daughter and granddaughter to live together as a family again.